Study this book. So I've been reading Genesis, and I'm reading it in a different translation because I just think it's important to read the Bible in some different wording sometimes to see if something comes out a little bit more clearer when you read it. And so today I was reading Genesis 15, verse 11, and I'll just read it in the NLT version for now. And it says, "Some vultures swooped down to eat the carcasses, but Abram chased them away." So God has promised that Abram right now is going to have descendants that are too numerous to count. And so at this stage in life, um, the way to have a covenant with God or a promise with God, God tells Abram, hey, go get these particular animals, split them in half, and sit them like opposite each other. And so what God is going to do is he's going to walk through, and that's going to be the covenant. And it says that a torch walks between the split carcasses, and that was God making a covenant with Abraham. So I'm reading this and I'm like, okay, why does it matter that vultures were swooping down on these carcasses and that Abram chases them away? And it's the Bible, so every single detail really does matter. So this isn't here for no reason. And I'm like, okay, God, like I know this means something and I want to share whatever this means. So what does it mean? And I felt like the reminder here was that Abram was serious about this covenant with God. That Abram is reminding us that sometimes there are vultures who are sweeping in to our covenants and promises with God. And we've got to be serious about removing any opposition to those promises and covenants that God is making. That Abram was saying, you know what, God, I'm about to be in covenant with God. God is making a promise with me, and I'm about to chase away anything that's trying to get in the way of that. And so it's just so unique to me, because I know in my culture, the term vulture typically is like referred to kind of like a woman or a woman or someone who's trying to get in the way of a relationship, in the way of a marriage. And so you hear phrases like, you got to keep the vultures out, meaning you got to keep those women away from your husband because they're in the way they're trying to get in the way of your marriage. And marriage, again, is a covenant before God. And so even in just our slang terms, what we're even saying, and we don't even realize it, I think, is that we got to keep those vultures away from our covenant in our marriages. We got to keep those women away from our husbands who are trying to break up that marriage, that covenant before God. We got to keep those men out who are not respecting the covenant we made with our husbands in marriage. And sometimes that covenant is almost being, people are working to destroy that covenant. Things are working to get in the way of that covenant, of that promise with God. And Abram is saying, we got to chase those things away. We got to chase anything in the way of that covenant with God. And sometimes it is a man. Sometimes it is a woman who's not respecting your marriage. Sometimes it's people who aren't respecting your relationship with God. Sometimes it's that inner circle that's in the way of God's promises, of what God promised you. Sometimes you're trying to take people with you to places that God promised you that they're not supposed to be. And sometimes you got to chase that out. Sometimes it's just your own decisions. Sometimes there are things in our lives that are unhealthy, that blind us, that cause us to be blocked from the promises of God. And Abram chased away those vultures. Abram chased away what was going to be in the way of his covenant with God. And we today have got to do the same. And so, God, I just thank you, Lord, that today what Abram did to chase those vultures away from his covenant, from them destroying the covenant that you were making with him, is still applicable today. That today we still got to be as adamant as Abram in chasing out anything that gets in the way of the covenant you've made with us, Father, and of the promises that you have given to us. Study this book.